many different partners. And you'll learn more about our federal partner that supports our land conservation specialist program. And then our Habitat Strike Team, we work with a lot of state partners, such as Illinois Department of Natural Resources. The other kind of overlying theme to our programs is that, next slide, is that, as I mentioned, we're doing a lot of work on private lands. So this is a map showing you different federal agencies and the land they kind of manage and own throughout the United States. And that star there, that's roughly where, Alton is, where the NGREC field station is. So as you can see, out west, there's a lot of, publicly owned land. This doesn't even include the state land that's owned. But here in the Midwest, especially in Illinois, like about 95% of the land is owned privately. So I always want to bring this up because, if we want to have some type of impact in terms of conservation, whether that be wildlife habitat creation or improvement or improving aquatic systems, we really need to be definitely thinking about what we're doing on the private lands. Next slide. And so just a little bit of background about myself. I actually am more of a wildlife ecologist by training. And I'm showing you pictures of a bunch of grassland birds. And this has been a group of birds that's been declining pretty significantly for the past few decades. And 85% of the nation's grasslands is actually owned privately. So again, just to drive the message home, to do any type of conservation work for grassland birds, you definitely need to be considering what are going on these private grasslands. Next slide. All right, so I'm definitely not going to be talking all night. I'm going to hand it over to our land conservation specialists. As a program manager, I'm kind of the person doing a lot of the coordination, a lot of the management, being the point of contact to our partners. So that's a lot of my job. So luckily tonight, you're going to hear basically from all the land conservation specialists tonight. And this is kind of an outline of what we're going to be discussing. So we're going to talk to you about our partnership with our federal partner. And also with that, we're going to talk about the Conservation Reserve Program. So this is a significant federal program that we're involved with, that the land conservation specialists help out with. You're going to be learning about some pollinator habitat management, and also wetland program that we assist with quite a bit, with a lot of monitoring throughout the state of Illinois. And then we'll finish with an audience question and answer section as well. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Laura Jackson. She is our most senior land conservation specialist. She is stationed actually down in Murfreesboro, Illinois. So unique to the land conservation specialists is that many of them are actually stationed in other parts of Illinois doing this work. So I'll hand it over to Laura. Next slide.
Well, hello, I'm Laura Jackson, and have worked as a land conservation specialist with the National Great Rivers Research and Education Center since 2017. Prior to working for NGREC, I was a forester for 10 years for the state of Kentucky and worked as a naturalist in Kentucky State Parks for 5 years. As you can see on the slide, I cover 10 counties, the southernmost counties at the very tip of Southern Illinois. Go ahead on to the next slide. So the beginning, the birth of the land conservation program, or the partnership between NGREC and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, started in 2010 when the Natural Resource Conservation Service, we're probably going to end up calling it by its acronym sometimes, NRCS, needed assistance. They needed technical assistance, field work, and they used the help of NGREC to do field work with just a few employees out of the NGREC field station office. And by 2013, it grew to where they needed far more assistance. And so satellite workers were needed. Like Justin mentioned, I'm out of Murfreesboro, so I'm a satellite office. And go ahead on over to the next slide. So these lovely faces that you see on your screen are different employees of NGREC that work with NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service. You've already seen Justin, and he has a little white border, and also Robin Ingersoll that has a white border also. They work out of our NGREC office. And so that's in Alton. And they cover the whole area on the map that is white, and then it has a gray diagonal line. So they cover quite a big area. The land conservation specialists all have a blue border around them, and under each of their names is where their home office is located. If you look on the map, for example, my name, Laura Jackson, at the very south of the map, where there's a little black star, that's where our home offices are located. And then all that blue area are the counties that I work in. So go ahead on to the next slide. The Natural Resource Conservation Service is a federal agency. Their mission statement is right there, but the heart of it, the basics of it, is that they help private agricultural landowners come up with conservation plans to address resource concerns that they might have. And they do that many different ways. Go ahead on to the next one. So NRCS, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, offices are located in USDA Service Center. These USDA service centers are located in most counties in all of Illinois, not every single one. And they also house the farm service agencies, which is very handy because we do share some of the responsibilities with some of the cost share programs. So they are another federal agency. So next slide. This picture, I don't want you to stress out if you can't see the words at the very bottom of the screen. I'll explain why I shared this slide anyway. The heart, or the backbone of the help that NRCS gives, is in their conservation planning. And they do this with different practices. And practices are basically things that you do on the land. An example would be number one is brush management. So that's removing unwanted brush, whether that be an invasive species, there could be numerous reasons. And the reason I showed this slide is because on the NRCS website, so it's there, in black and white on the screen, you can go to that website and click on each of these red dots individually, and it will tell you about each of those practices. And I thought that would be very helpful even for some people who don't own agricultural land. Go ahead to the next slide. So land conservation specialists, surprise, surprise, we have technical specializations. You can read what some of those are, where NRCS tends to lean on us for our expertise. We have very varied backgrounds from wildlife management, forestry, ecology, within our employees. For an example, in my 10-county area, between all of the NRCS employees and the partners, I'm one of only 2 people that can do a prescribed burn plan to their specifications. Go ahead to the next slide. So before we move to our next presenter and go through some of these programs, I just thought it might help to visually see how all this lays out. So the NRCS and the Farm Service Agency, FSA, are both housed under the United States Department of Agriculture. And within those, if you would be interested in the Conservation Reserve Program, the administration of that would go through FSA. While after you got started in the program, the technical guidance and expertise would come from NRCS. With the wetland easements that we'll also talk about later, the technical guidance and the administration. So you would start with the Natural Resource Conservation Service. So next, Jacob Williams out of the Macomb, Illinois office will be sharing with you about the Cropland Conservation Reserve Program. I almost said it wrong. Take it away.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thanks for Laura for the introduction. I'm going to give a brief overview of the Conservation Reserve Program, commonly referred to as CRP. The Conservation Reserve Program is administered by the Farm Service Agency, but they are essentially just the bookkeepers and the holders of the contracts. NRCS handles the rest. So
Hey guys, this is Sarah. Jacob, I think that you're frozen. I don't know if you want to try turning your camera off and seeing if you can still speak. Oh, I think you might be back.
I'm back.
Great. Okay.
I think where I left off, so CRP is designed to retire environmentally sensitive agricultural land. Environmentally sensitive land would be land with poor soils that has, it's on a steep slope, so it's highly erodible. Floodplain land that is often inundated with water, or land that just is hard to farm and grows a poor crop. This program's goals are to improve soil health, prevent erosion, improve water quality, and also create vast wildlife habitat. We go on to the next slide. So to get in this program, it is completely centered around agricultural producing land. It has to be planted to a commodity crop. In the state of Illinois, our commodity crops are corn, soybeans, and wheat. That'd be out of 4 of the past 6 years, and that's a revolving window as time goes forward. Enrollment eligibility is centered around whether the land is highly erodible, whether it was in a previous CRP contract, and then there are also priority areas, many of which are in this area or along the Illinois River watershed and the Mississippi watershed. Go on to the next one. The CRP program is split into 2 different sub-programs, the general program and the continuous. The general program only comes around once every farm bill, which is supposed to be every year, but that doesn't always happen. It is a very broad program that is very easily applied. The producers choose what practices they put where, and then they are scored and compete nationally on whether they get accepted into the program. The continuous program, however, is approved locally by the FSA county committees. The county committees are a little board that is elected to make sure that conservation compliance is being upheld within the local areas. These committees approve these contracts, and most of the time they do, but the continuous program has very strict rules on what can be applied where, and it has to be, these producers have to work pretty closely with NRCS to make these practices fit their land. FSA pays a rental rate based upon the soil types from where you're putting these practices. If you look down here in the corner, we'll see a map of average rental rates for 2018. So we see Logan County, Illinois, $289 an acre versus South Texas at $5 an acre. And that is simply because the land here in central Illinois and across the Corn Belt is very good at producing valuable crops. So it's worth a lot. And to encourage producers to take it out of production, the government's willing to pay a pretty penny. So if we go on to the next one. So this was CRP enrollment in 2018. There was a total of 22 million acres across the country. The color coding is the number of contracts per county. That doesn't really give an acreage, but it kind of shows how many different agricultural producers are involved in this program. Go on to the next one. These are some examples of very popular CRP practices. The field border practice can be applied pretty much anywhere on any size field. It is generally planted to tall prairie grasses. It is very good at preventing erosion, catching fertilizer runoff, and also is quite valuable to wildlife. Many upland bird species can't thrive in a habitat where it is just agricultural land butted right up to timber. So having this transitional zone of prairie grass helps support those birds. Riparian buffers are also implemented in creek bottoms and river bottoms. They help prevent erosion and are really geared around catching the fertilizer runoff. The prairie strip is a new practice for this year. They can be put out through a field or along like a border, and it is more geared towards wildlife habitat. So it is planted with a diverse mix of prairie grasses and flowers. We go on to the next one. So some of the benefits of CRP, it is really good at reducing soil erosion. So a monoculture of corn and soybeans that is fallow, bare ground most of the year generally erodes some, but if it's planted to perennial grasses, it really holds the soil. A couple of statistics with that. In 2017, NRCS estimated that CRP ground held back 152 million tons of sediment out of our river systems. And another facet of that is reducing fertilizer runoff. NRCS estimated that almost 490 million tons of fertilizer in 2017 were kept out of our waters because of CRP buffers. CRP has been found to be a link with the increase of many upland wildlife, including the ringneck pheasant, bobwhite quail. They've also linked CRP to an increase of migratory ducks in the prairie pothole region, which is eastern Montana, Minnesota, and the Dakotas. So in general, CRP is a pretty stellar program. It is widely used across the country and provides a lot of good. So if we go on to the next slide, next will be Dalton Carans. He'll be talking about one of the favorite practices of the NRCS staff, which is the pollinator habitat.
Thank you, Jacob. So he hit the nail right on the head there. My name is Dalton Kearns. I'm one of the newer land conservation specialists. I'm based out of the Virginia office in Cass County. I cover Cass, Mason, Fulton, Menard, Logan, and Sangamon counties. And I'm going to be going over just a brief description of the conservation practice number 42, also known as the pollinator habitat plan. Next slide. So before I get too deep in the detail, what is a pollinator? Pollinator is an animal or an insect that moves pollen from the male structure of the plant to the female structure of the same plant species. So why is that important? Why are pollinators important today? So agriculture depends greatly on pollination. Over 1/3 of our nation's food products rely on pollinators doing their job. In the US alone, they're accountable for nearly $20 billion in agricultural commodities, and then worldwide, over $217 billion worldwide. So what is the biggest issue we're facing now with pollinator habitat? And that is the loss of habitat. Next slide. So to combat the loss of habitat for pollinators, that's what the pollinator program is here to do. Basically, it gives landowners the option to take sensitive land out of row crop agriculture and put it into a diverse planting of wildflowers, legumes, and grasses. So these wildflower plantings for pollinator habitat typically include about 25% native grasses, And the majority of the other plants are flowering plants. As you can see on the right, you want to make sure that these flowers are in bloom throughout the majority, if not all, of the growing season. That's probably one of the biggest parts of it. And so one of the other great things about this program is that the legumes and the wildflowers are beneficial to other wildlife as well, not just pollinators. Yeah, what else? Also, one thing to kind of keep in mind is the pollinators are not just bees and butterflies. Pollinators can also be birds, moths, ants, small mammals, and certain species of bats as well. Next slide. So some of you may be asking, what are the general requirements for this practice? Jacob did a great job at kind of going over the majority of those requirements, but just a brief overview of the CP42 requirements are you can enroll in both general and continuous signups. They're generally about 10-year contracts, and you must be maintaining these programs for the duration of the contract. For a minimum requirements, it is half an acre, but that doesn't mean that the average landowner can't buy these seed mixes and plant them in like even as small as a 10 by 10 plot in your backyard. It's something that you can do anywhere, but for NRCS purposes, we require a minimum of half an acre. And so generally another requirement is they want to see at least 9 species of pollinator-friendly wildflowers and the legumes. And then also your seeded grasses must be native. Next slide. Yep. Additional benefits. So as you can see on the picture on the right, these native plants really combat erosion well. You can see just how deep those root systems go compared to on the far left of that picture, your turf grass you'd see in your yard. This also provides food for many other animals. I have a picture of a white-tailed deer, insects down there, ornate box turtles. That's actually an eastern box turtle, my bad. But this program also provides essential nesting, brooding, and bedding habitat for all these species, as well as upland game such as your quail and pheasant, and also attracts insects for your pheasant and quail young. I know there's a lot of people out there that probably love to enjoy hunting around these plantings as well. And finally, aesthetics. You can't really beat the view of a pollinator planting in the middle of the growing season with the broad array of all the different colors. It's quite the sight. Next slide. So what is the land conservation specialist role in the conservation practice 42? Just briefly, we can assist in any technical support for the landowners. We'll go out there and we can do all the monitoring. We can do all the burn plan writing, writing management plans, and just kind of talking with the landowners just to kind of see what mid-contract management needs to be done. And that kind of leads me to my next thing. So next, Levi Reed is going to be talking about contract management. Levi graduated from the University of Illinois Springfield with a master's in environmental science. And before coming to NGREC, he was previously a graduate intern with the IDNR, working within the Division of Private Lands with IRAP, CSP, and CREP. So I'm going to let him take it away.
How's it going? As Dalton said, my name is Levi Reed, and I'm a land conservation specialist covering Christian, Montgomery, Bond, Clinton, and Fayette County. With Dalton and the others talking about CRP, I wanted to discuss different mid-contract management options as well as maintenance when enrolled in CRP. Before I begin discussing the particular management practices, I wanted to first touch on the primary goals and benefits of management. A few of them are to improve wildlife habitat, control woody vegetation, remove invasive species, and increase plant diversity. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, there we go. First, I'd like to talk about conservation mowing. This is considered a maintenance practice for CRP and not the mid-contract management that I'll be talking about in a little bit. This alone is not enough to manage a CRP property, and additional work must be conducted during the CRP contract. The main purpose behind conservation mowing is to help control the growth of woody plants within grasslands. Over time, without management, trees and shrubs can quickly take over and dominate grasslands, and it's important to control the spread. Some common woody stems found in grasslands are invasive shrubs and trees. Some common invasive woody plants found in Illinois are honeysuckle, autumn olive, tree of heaven, and common buckthorn. Invasive species tend to be found in CRP fields due to the high level of disturbances that occur in these early successional habitats. Conservation mowing should not occur until after August 1st. The primary nesting season for birds is from May 15th to August 1st. Grasslands are critical for nesting and brood habitats for these birds. This maintenance can help increase desirable plant species as well. Conducting spot or section mowing is beneficial because it leaves undisturbed habitat for wildlife while removing woody plants. Fields should be split into 3 sections and 1 section done per year if the field is larger than 20 acres. This ensures that it leaves adequate habitat year-round for wildlife. Next slide. Prescribed burning is one of the mid-contract management options available to landowners enrolled in CRP. One of the key benefits to prescribed burning is to decrease the woody plant species found within grasslands. Prescribed burning also helps increase plant diversity. This is done by allowing germination of the seedbed as well as helping non-dominant plant species. Burning can be very helpful in increasing the quantity of forbs and legumes when grasses have become too dominant. Another benefit is removing dead plant matter. Over time, dead plant matter accumulates within fields, which can limit the movement of birds and small animals. Along with this, it helps decrease the chance of wildfire occurring by removing the dead plant matter that can be easily caught on fire by natural or human causes. And this was actually a picture from 2019 spring while I was at DNR. Next slide. Another option for mid-contract management within CRP is strip disking. This is the light disking of ground exposing approximately half of the soil. It does this while leaving much of the vegetation intact. This is important to ensure that the exposed soil is not prone to erosion. This practice is used on fields where grasses dominate the habitat and the landowner is looking to increase the level of forbs and legumes within the grassland. Over time, grasses tend to push out forbs and legumes, so this practice is crucial in ensuring a more diverse plant community. This practice, if used properly, is also very beneficial to game species like bobwhite quail, ringneck pheasant, and wild turkey, as well as non-game bird populations. Over time, as less bare soil is exposed, it leads to an accumulation of litter on the ground, as well as a higher density of plant matter. This leads to a decline in the wildlife benefits, and strip disking is a great option to open areas for birds and other wildlife. Next slide. Lastly, interceding is another mid-contract management option for landowners for their CRP properties. Interceding is a great way of adding a particular or group of species to a field. Before interceding, though, a disturbance such as prescribed burning, strip disking, or chemical spraying must be done to open up an area for those dispersed seeds to establish. Without any disturbance, it is much more difficult to establish a seed mix with interceding. Like I mentioned earlier, if a field was originally seeded with grasses, forbs, and legumes, over time the grasses tend to dominate the forbs and legumes. Interceding allows landowners to help offset this issue by reincorporating forbs and legumes back into these fields that have become grass dominant. The seed mix for interceding is dependent on the field practice. Interceding can be one species or a group of different plant species that someone is looking to better establish on their property. That is all I have for you today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you're able to learn a little bit about CRP maintenance and mid-contract management practices. Now I'd like to introduce you all to Robin. Robin has been with NGREC since 2013. She works as a field biologist and conducts research on the plants and animals of floodplain ecosystems for several different grants, some of which include the United States Geological Survey and the United States Army Corps of Engineers. She also works with NRCS, helping them with several other programs. I'll hand it over to Robin now.
Thank you, Levi. Hi, everyone. These are some of the counties that I work in, just a few of them. But tonight, I'll be talking about the NRCS's program called Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or ACEP. Next slide. The conversion of wetlands began in the 1780s, and over the next 2 centuries, about 77% of our wetlands have been drained or altered for development and agriculture. Since the 1990s, more specifically the flood of '93, increasing knowledge about the importance of wetlands has led to policy changes, including the creation of the Wetlands Reserve Program, or as you will hear me refer to as WRP. Next slide. Since the 1990 Farm Bill, more than 2.3 million acres of wetlands have been enrolled in WRP nationwide. The program provides technical and financial assistance to landowners to restore, enhance, and protect wetlands through 30-year or perpetual easements. Perpetuity means for eternity. The goal of the program is to restore wetland functions to their natural conditions. This provides clear benefits for migratory birds and other dependent species as well. The role of NGREC is to provide the annual monitoring of these wetlands. Monitoring is necessary to ensure that full wetland functions and values are achieved and maintained, to detect any violations, also to direct the course of management, and to maintain a good working relationship between the landowner and NRCS. As you can see here, this is just outside of Hamel along Silver Creek. In the top left, the 2007 image, you can see the different coloration in the field. This shows like the lower elevations that he's probably not getting as much yield off of. Then the top right is the 2010 image when it flooded, and you can tell by the turbidity, the color of the flood water there, how much topsoil was lost to erosion. Then in 2011, it was entered into a WRP contract. And in the bottom left, after construction was mostly completed by 2013, and then by the flood of 2018, which is the bottom right, it was holding the flood water like it should. Next slide. And this is what it looks like today. I think it's beautiful. Next slide. So what is a wetland? A wetland is an ecosystem that is flooded by water, either permanently or seasonally. And it's where the oxygen-free, also known as anaerobic processes take place. The primary factor that distinguishes wetlands from other bodies of water is the vegetation that grows there. It is adapted to the unique hydric soils. NGREC's work with the WREs include identification of these plants and soils. We also identify invasive species that may be growing there. There's an example in the photo on the right. It's just common reed, AKA Phragmites, and this one's in Cahokia. Next slide. So how do wetlands work? After a rain, the water that runs off of our roads and parking lots and farm fields are filled with these contaminants and sediments. And as they rush downstream, they enter into an inflow structure where the ponding effect slows the water traveling through it. And this lets the leaf litter and the sediments and other pollutants kind of sink to the bottom. The water is filtered then by microorganisms and the algae that grow in the wetland. Cleaner water is then released back into the river or the creek at the outlet. This is a picture of a WRE along the Monroe City Creek, where they have major erosion and water quality problems. And this leads me to my next slide. Also equally important is the reduction of erosion. Here's a closer look at the bordering property of this same WRE. Here we see the highly channelized Monroe City Creek with the farmland on the right side in that bottom picture. It has severe erosion problems going on. He's obviously not in a program. The farmer has been losing about a foot or more of his acreage every year, every spring. And the right side is in WRP, and you can see lots of vegetation holding the bank in place. Next slide. Another great service a wetland provides is storing floodwaters. According to the U.S. Geological Service, wetlands along the Mississippi River once stored over 60 days of floodwater. Today is only about 12 days. And as a result, there are more frequent flooding events that affect cities and towns along the river. And on this map, we can see Grafton, Alton, West Alton, Wood River, and St. Louis all during the 2018 flood. Next slide. And of course, habitat. Wetlands maintain habitat for plants and the animals, several which are listed as threatened and endangered. There have been, here we have an American bittern that I photographed in Calhoun County last year, and a bald eagle's nest that's located in Mullen Slough, which is a very urbanized easement located between Centerville and Cahokia. And that's in St. Clair County. And these nesting pair have returned to their nest for the past 8 years. And that's all I have today. In conclusions, Justin?
Thank you, Robin. Great. Well, just kind of concluding our talk this evening, you know, I hope everyone got a glimpse a little bit of what the Land Conservation Specialist Program is about. It's a very unique, very beneficial program, and it, you know, as all of them spoke to, it is really providing that technical assistance to not just the landowners, but also the partners. The NRCS partners are often trained more and then the soil sciences. So we bring that ecological and biological knowledge to the table. And also another really important aspect of their position is that they actually can go do the one-on-one outreach to landowners. You know, for instance, Dalton can meet a landowner to discuss, you know, if that pollinator habitat is establishing correctly. Another aspect of their position doesn't get as much glory, I guess, but there is quite a bit of administrative support that goes on behind the scenes that our specialists are helping NRCS with lots of associated paperwork and also conservation mapping and various software programs. And as Robin mentioned, monitoring more and more is something that the NRCS is leaning on us to help them out with, to do monitor easements, but also more and more to help them look at conservation reserve program practices and to see if they're functioning and being established correctly. And finally, you know, all their work influences the conservation practices that are being put in across the Illinois landscape. So on the right, you can see, although this figure is slightly dated, but that's just a year's work of land conservation specialists and the amount of acres our land conservation specialists are impacting across the state of Illinois. So ultimately, this is improving, you know, everything from terrestrial habitat for wildlife to, you know, the aquatic habitats within these watersheds. So with that, next slide. I think this concludes our land conservation specialist program. I do thank everyone for tuning in this evening. I thank all the land conservation specialists for sharing different aspects of their job. You can get more information at our website, and also you can contact these specialists by going to our staff webpage as well. So with that, I don't know, Jen, if you want to field any questions. I haven't been reading the chat, so I'm not sure if there's any questions, but.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep my screen up, but we have two questions. One is from Dr. Kevin Tucker. He said, or he asked, Are there local studies regarding the reduction of fertilizer runoff related to CRP application? And that was to Jacob, but I believe anybody can field it. So if anyone wants to answer that.
This is Jake here. I'll hop in and answer that. So the fertilizer runoff was actually a estimate that was created using the Food and Agriculture Policy Research Institute models. I am sure that there's probably some actual hands-on research going on, but I just don't have any of that in front of me.
Okay. All right. And then the other question was from John Sloan, and it's for Dalton, but again, anybody can probably jump in. He has part of their farm in a pollinator program, but they didn't get a very good stand of flowering plants. What are the options that they have for trying to improve the stand of flowering plants?
Hey, John, this is Dalton. Hope you guys can hear me all right. One thing with plantings in general, especially pollinator plantings that I've had experience with, is a lot of these plants actually won't pop up in the first year or two. Some may take a few years to get established. So patience is king, or patience is key with those. But if it's been a few years and you're still not having any success, I left that question till the end, just in case any of that got covered by Levi. So there are obviously multiple options you can kind of work with that, whether it be maybe doing some strip disking to kind of give the legumes and wildflowers some more options to grow. Also getting some burns in as well. That's always great for wildflowers and grasses, just kind of depending on how you kind of rotate those burns. But I can also leave my email too if you'd like to get any more answers from that. I don't really know if I covered it too well, but yeah, patience is key with those.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, we have a lot of grasses in our planting.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, thank you everyone for joining. I hope you learned something, and you have Justin's email, and I believe you have my email as well with the registration link. So feel free to reach out if anything pops into your head at midnight tonight. So other than that, have a great evening, and thank you again for joining us on our first virtual Neighbor Nights event.
I want to echo what.
Thanks, guys. Good information. I enjoyed it.
Thank you guys all so much for joining, and we'll see you at the next one. And thank you so much, Jen, for hosting tonight.